points clear in the championship from Alain Prost. So whatever happens in Italy this afternoon, Senna will still lead the table tonight. And in the Constructors' Championship, McLaren's lead is 14 points. Williams showing ever-improving form for Mansell and Patrese. But it's Ferrari second in the Constructors, and this afternoon Ferrari are very much on home ground. But conditions in Italy, well, they couldn't be worse. A downpour at Imola, but in position, I am sure, are James Hunt and Murray Walker.
Well, you spotted it, Steve, and this is the big question right now. On Friday, it was bitterly cold at Imola. Yesterday, Saturday, it poured with rain when we got up and looked out of our hotel bedroom windows this morning. Bright blue sky, sunshine, all good for a fine race. But at 1300 hours Italian time, we started to get some rain spots. Then 40 minutes later, lightning and thunder, and you can see the situation now. I can tell you that all the cars are on the grid with dry condition tyres, that is to say slick treaded tyres with no tread pattern on them. And there seems little doubt to me that this will be declared a wet race, in which case the cars will be starting on wet condition tyres. You can see there Ayrton Senna, confirmation that he's 11 points as a result of 2 wins ahead of Alain Prost in the World Championship. And in third position, equal, Riccardo Patrese and Nelson Piquet. Nigel Mansell, driving for Williams, has yet to score. He's had gearbox problems this morning with the Williams, as has Riccardo Patrese. That has been the team's Achilles heel.
The wet race, there is more than enough water on the circuit now for the organisers to make that decision. And in fact, the last car to make its way onto the grid was Gianni Morbidelli in the Minardi Ferrari, and he actually appeared on wet tyres. Everybody else came onto the grid. The track, of course, wasn't as wet as it is now. They went out on regular, dry, slick tyres. All the teams have got their wet weather tyres alongside the cars, and in fact, most are now in the process of changing over from the slicks to full wet weather tyres. So really a great disappointment indeed after such a beautiful morning, and a chance when we had to see really who was going to be in contention for the race.
There is the grid though. Ayrton Senna on pole with Riccardo Patrese beside him. Second row, Alain Prost and Nigel Mansell. Then Gerhard Berger, fastest in this morning's warm-up. Stefano Modena in 6th place. Jean Alesi and Gianni Morbidelli, the Minardi, looking good. Pierluigi Martini and Satoru Nakajima for Tyrrell. Then Andrea De Cesaris and Bertrand Gachot for Jordan, side by side. Marino and Piquet, the Benettons, also side by side. Then it's Maurizio Gugelmin and JJ Leto. Eric Bernard and Martin Brundle with the new Brabham. Eric Comas and Aguri Suzuki. Eric van der Poel and Ivan Capelli, the Ilmore-engined Leighton House. Mark Blundell shares the next row with Thierry Boutsen, and at the back come Mika Hakkinen and not, as the caption says, Martin Donnelly, but in fact Julian Bailey.
Well, it seems somebody hasn't caught up with the fact that Julian Bailey is deputising for Martin, but Martin, of course, probably watching this back home, looking forward to his return to Grand Prix racing sometime later this year.
Well, I'm sure that Martin Donnelly wouldn't wish to return in these conditions. We saw yesterday in the second qualifying session exactly what rain can do at this Imola circuit. It put 20 seconds a lap on the times recorded by the cars going round here. And it favours, of course, the cars with lesser horsepower. We'll find out when the San Marino gets underway in a few moments. Join us again after the break.
And this year, that both Lotus cars will have started a Grand Prix, because Julian Bailey, for a variety of reasons, was unable to qualify at Phoenix and Brazil. Talking of Brazil, there he is, Mr. Brazil himself, Ayrton Senna, twice the world champion, including 1990, pole position for the 55th time. He won here at San Marino, at Imola, in 1988 and 1989, and he was second fastest in the warm-up this morning to his teammate Gerhard Berger.
Now, I know a lot of people with British interests at home will be waiting for some results from Nigel Mansell, and of course he's promised a lot this year already with the new Williams, which is clearly a very competitive and fast car. There's Patrese, who's on the front row of the grid. He won this race last year, Mansell's Williams teammate. And of course, problems with their new semi-automatic gearbox have afflicted the team so far, and in particular on Nigel Mansell's car? Well, if the problems are mechanical, the wet weather may well be of help to the Williams team and to their reliability with the gearbox, because of course the cars get a lot less strain on a damp track, and that ups the mechanical reliability enormously. So this may well help the Williams team if they haven't got that gearbox 100% sorted yet, and clearly they haven't got it 100% right, because both cars had problems with it this morning.
Alain Prost, third on the grid in the semi-automatic gearbox Ferrari. He was judged by a lot of experts today to be the only person who had put up a truly honest time in the half-hour practice this morning of the top 3, because Berger went out in the spare car, was 1.4 seconds faster than Senna, and Berger undoubtedly had virtually empty petrol tank. So Prost, in terms of setup, is looking in good shape for the race. Incidentally, you've just seen on your television screen something that I have yet to see in 1991, and that's the steering wheel of a Williams, because as soon as the car stops, the steering wheel is taken off. This is the Ferrari steering wheel of Alain Prost, but Williams are very security-minded, especially about the gear change operating mechanism for their semi-automatic gearbox, and that's the first time I've seen a Williams steering wheel this year. So, Alain Prost, there is the man who has won more Grand Prix in the history of the World Championship than anyone else, carrying the famous number 27 with 44 wins.
Welcome back to Imola, and welcome back to a very wet and rainy Imola. The rain is dropping from the sky in enormous quantities. We still don't believe the organisers have declared it so far a wet race. However, if more than 50% of the grid changes to wet tyres, they will be obliged to. Am I right, John?
I believe that's the case, Richard, and in fact it's really pelting it down right now, and I'm beginning to wonder, are the conditions going to be almost too bad, in fact, to allow the race to start on time? Because of course Imola is a very high-speed circuit. We have seen aquaplaning during the Saturday practice, drivers coming in complaining, and Ayrton Senna, amongst others, complained that this Imola track, damp for damp, is a lot slipperier than we saw in Brazil back at the Brazilian Grand Prix. So he is concerned about the amount of, or the lack of grip that the Imola circuit is going to provide in these very, very wet conditions we are faced with right now.
Well, those were the wet tyres we saw just now on Gerhard Berger's car. Everybody fitting wets. It's difficult to see from up here, but I think the greater proportion of the grid now fitted the wet tyres, which they brought to the start line with them.
Yes, everybody, is mandatory. There's no way that anyone could do a lap on this circuit on racing slicks. So any chance of somebody taking a flyer and trying to get away with not making that first pit stop to change from wet to dry, that's totally gone. And in fact, changes are occurring to cars, not just with putting wet weather tyres on, but we saw the Minardi team rushing back to the pits, bringing out a new rear wing and a new nose, and they've probably been set up with slightly more downforce to accommodate these very wet conditions we're now faced with.
Well, as we saw on Saturday afternoon, the teams have had plenty of opportunity to try wet running, because it was very wet on Saturday. In fact, it was torrentially wet. This, as we've said before, is good news for the teams which are slightly lower on horsepower. Imola is a horsepower circuit for people like Lotus, for example, who are definitely down on horsepower compared to Marlboro McLaren and to the Williams Renault. This weather can only be good news. In fact, Mika Hakkinen, when I spoke to him at lunchtime earlier today, actually had his fingers crossed for rain.
Well, I would say Mika's not so much looking forward to a wet race as using all that experience that he's gained up in Finland, because virtually half the year in Finland they don't have rain, they've got snow and ice, so he learns to drive on very slippery surfaces. So of course this type of condition will work in his favor, but I don't really believe the advantage that he will gain from it is so much of a car advantage. I think it really lies in his own two hands.
Well, also the setup that Lotus achieved for the wet seemed to work better for them than any setup they could produce here in the dry. So we are looking at a wet race then, but let's remember that the grid was established on Friday in the dry. Ayrton Senna 121, Riccardo Patrese also 121, Prost and Mansell on 122, making the second row of the grid. Gerhard Berger, quickest in this morning's warm-up. He was also quick in the wet, followed by Stefano Modena, and then Jean Alesi, who had an engine fire and didn't have much luck in the qualifying sessions. And Gianni Morbidelli, the Ferrari engine Minardi, looking very strong indeed. Pierluigi Martini, his teammates on the grid behind him, with Satoru Nakajima alongside. Then the two Jordans of Andrea De Cesaris and Bertrand Gachot. Roberto Marino follows for Benetton with his teammate alongside. That's Nelson Piquet. Then Maurizio Gugelmin and JJ Leto, the only Dallara to qualify for this race. Eric Bernard shares the next row with Martin Brundle and is followed by Eric Comas and Aguri Suzuki for Larousse. A fine effort in pre-qualifying and qualifying gets Eric van der Poel next, with Ivan Capelli alongside, Mark Blundell's Brabham behind him, and Thierry Boutsen alongside for Ligier. And then finally, on the very back row, the two Lotuses, their times established in the dry, Mika Hakkinen and Julian Bailey. Out of it, Gabriele Tarquini and Fabrizio Barbazza for AGS, and the very unlucky footwork team, Alex Caffey with the new car, and Michele Alboreto still injured from his practice accident. So out of the car now, and John, I think you may well be right about the weather and the delayed start, because that was Alain Prost quite clearly away from the car, and according to the clock, the start of this race is due any moment now.
Yes, and we've just had a few words back from the start line that Stefano Modena may not in fact have changed onto wet weather tyres. Uncle Ken Tyrrell, of course, a master of strategy, may well be plotting not to put wet tyres onto Modena's car. If I was Modena, I'd be screaming at him, put them on, please, because these conditions really are very, very bad indeed. It is still raining, it's heavy rain. Anyway, we have to see. I'm sure Ken at the last minute will inform the mechanics to get those wet tyres onto that Tyrrell Honda.
Well, a decision time for all the team managers, because although it is raining and although the track is puddled, as you can see there looking at the grid, the sky above us is actually a lot lighter than it was 15 minutes ago.
Well, just literally the rain cloud has passed over. We've now got a bit of blue sky above us, but of course I think we're going to see this weather really throughout the day. It came across around midday and it looked threatening, then it cleared up again. We all sort of breathed a sigh of relief. Then, of course, just the moment the cars begin to leave to go onto the grid, the first few drops of rain fell, and in fact it's not stopped raining. It is now just about clear, but of course we're left with a saturated racetrack, and it is obligatory for anybody with any common sense at all to be on wet weather tyres. Interestingly enough, Pirelli have got a new wet weather tyre here, which is based on their slick. Now, we were talking about this yesterday, about race tyres and wet weather tyres and so on and so forth, and Pirelli have actually made up a new wet weather tyre, which is based on one of their dry weather slick compounds. Now, Goodyear were telling us what they do and the difference they have and the difficulties they have with their compounds over these deep tread block tyres. But Pirelli appear to have done something, so whether any of those cars are going to be on that new tyre, we are not yet aware of that.
Well, there was the 1 minute board, which means we are starting on time. The engine's fired up. As John says, everybody will start on wet. Some of the teams this morning, although they were very tight-lipped about their tyres and gave us the usual answer, two black ones with holes in the middle and the front, same at the back, some of the teams were planning to go through this race if they could without a tyre stop, but it now looks as if this is going to become a race of pit stops, and we have seen places lost in the pits many times before.
Yes, we have, and now we've just been informed that Modena is on wet tyres, so a lot easier day for Stefano Modena starting on those wet tyres. But of course, with these very wet conditions, we will see eventually a pit stop taking place. That will be to go from wets to dries, but of course there may be further pit stops. After rain, a racetrack is left both clean and abrasive. Clean is nice in one way, abrasive is bad in another way. So this is going to be a race in which the pit lane is going to be exceptionally busy, but just look at the amount of water being thrown up by those leading cars. Those guys from the sort of third row back are going to be driving into the most impossible conditions. They will not be able to see ahead of them at all. All they can do is use their peripheral vision to pick up reference points to the side of them to know roughly where they are. Now they're going to come down here into the Tossa Hairpin Bend. That's the section of circuit you see in red. They'll be approaching that somewhere in the region of 185 miles an hour in the wet.
Well, it does make the money that we hear bandied around in the pits seem as if it's all worthwhile. If you link this to your own experiences of driving on the motorway in the rain, and we've done some of that in the past few days, and we both know how difficult and how scary that can be. Put yourself in a race car travelling at 180 miles an hour around this just over 3-mile Imola circuit, and now is where these drivers earn their money.
And of course, in a sense, Ayrton Senna, by being on pole position, has got the best opportunity of anybody to take advantage of his pole position. Ordinarily, pole is the best place on the grid, but in these conditions, if he can manage to control the wheel spin and get his momentum rolling, then he can take the lead, and of course he'll have a clear track ahead of him. Everybody else behind will be driving in his spray. Just look at Patrese coming out of that corner. You can see just trying to pick up the throttle, the back end flipping left and right, and really very, very difficult conditions indeed. Coming down here into the Ravazza, oh look, we see, who's it? Alan Prost already has had a spin. Now that's just on the parade lap. Alan Prost having difficulty controlling his car. Just the sheer, look at this, Gerhard Berger the same. Now there must be a river somewhere in that part of the track we can't see. There is water rushing across the track. Alan Prost's car is stopped. He's now trying to get out of the car. His engine is stalled. He doesn't have an onboard starter. And this is an absolutely unbelievable situation. I've never ever seen that happen before. Before a race starts, I understand during the course of a race, but there must be water running across the track just as they come under the bridge before the two right-hand corners, the Ravazza. But Alan Prost's car is stopped. His engine is stalled. He's attempting to get out of the car. Gerhard Berger had the same problem, managed to keep his engine running. Of course, he will have to now take up a position at the back of the grid. He will not be allowed to take his proper position on the grid because he has lost position. Now, what are the organisers going to do? Are they going to call force majeure because Alan Prost technically hasn't completed a lap? I don't know. I've never ever had a situation like this before.
Well, this is Italy, of course, and Alain Prost is a Ferrari driver. The Tifosi, I think, might pull this racetrack apart if this race begins without Alain Prost.
Well, we don't see the start of the race. We've got Alain Prost's car 3/4 of a way around to that, and here we are now. We're on the grid.
Well, they are obviously going to start without Alain Prost because the cars are formed up and they are waiting for the last few to come round. We'll see that flag at the beginning which warns the drivers at the front that the red and green sequence is imminent. Ayrton Senna on pole, established in the dry at 1:21. The wet time, the best wet time on empty tanks in qualifying was 1:41. These cars are now on full tanks. There's the 5-second warning that says the start of this race is imminent, and it begins without Alain Prost as one of the Ferraris. Red lights and green lights, away they go, feathering the clutch here. This is really difficult, but Senna weaving, and Patrese jumps him.
Yes.
Crazy.
Riccardo Patrese got the jump on Ayrton Senna. He just managed to make that balance between throttle and clutch better than anybody else. He's got the lead. Gerhard Berger, in fact, managed to get back onto his proper grid position, so theoretically he must not have allowed anybody from behind get past him. So Berger started where he was on the grid initially, but Riccardo Patrese has got the lead. Ayrton Senna second. Looks like Stefano Modena has made a flyer in third. Berger fourth, and Alesi fifth. The two Minardi sixth and seventh.
John Alesi came flying through on the inside of that corner and made a really good pickup, and I think now we'll see him in third or fourth place. No,
it's Stefano Modena in third place. There we see there is John Alesi back in sixth spot at this stage. Stefano Modena was the one that really had a flyer, and of course maybe he has taken that chance on those new Pirelli tyres. The Tyrrell, of course, along with the Benetton, Brabhams and the Dalaras are on Pirellis, everybody else on Goodyears. But look how bad, you can see how slowly these cars are travelling. The conditions are extremely bad. This is coming down the hill towards the Acqua Minerale corner, and the gap between first and last has opened up probably about 3 times the distance you would have in normal conditions. Gerhard Berger looking to get past Stefano Modena. Alan Prost utterly dejected, and let's see what happens coming around this corner. This is the problem corner. Modena staying well over to the left coming around the corner.
Well, Patrese leads from Ayrton Senna, and that will have satisfied the Tifosi to some extent because Riccardo Patrese, of course, Italian, and the Italians support Italians very fervently indeed. One of the Ferraris out of it before this race began, and that really is an upset. The conditions, as you say, John, truly appalling. Patrese has been pumped up for this all weekend. Gerhard Berger, too, was very quick in the wet, and we saw him pressuring just now. chasing the back end of that Tyrrell. Who will come round? Yes, it's still the Tyrrell there, and look at the spray. They just disappeared in that. It must be impossible to drive, John.
Well, it's impossible for everybody but for Tracy. Oh, there's Nigel Mansell now. He's had a spin at the chicane. His car's been pushed, or he's spun backwards. We're not quite sure. We'll probably have a chance to see that in replay. But Nigel Mansell, having barely completed a lap of the race, appears to be out of the race also.
Well, certainly no engine and being pushed back. There goes the steering wheel. We've seen that gesture from Nigel Mansell before. Patrese leads by a considerable margin now from Ayrton Senna, and that reverses the situation, doesn't it? Because Senna normally likes to have quite a distance.
Yes, he does, but of course Senna's being very, very canny indeed. He knows that there's a long way to go in this motor race. Let Patrese get out if he wants, up a second or 2 seconds or 3 seconds. Nelson Piquet out. That's the tosser hairpin bend at the end of the long straight. Nelson Piquet on his Pirelli tires having no more luck than Nigel Mansell or poor Alain Prost.
So we've lost 3 of our front runners already. Prost before the race began, Mansell after about a lap, and now Piquet as well has left us. There's Nigel Mansell walking back to the pits, and his afternoon's work over almost before it has begun, although not quite as abruptly as Alain Prost, and Alain Prost must be severely annoyed.
I think he's totally shocked. I'm sure the poor man does not know what's happened to him. I don't think he's ever experienced anything as bad as that in his career as we've just seen right now. Gerhard Berger in 4th place, coming under pressure. In fact, I think Berger has just overtaken Modena. Modena back into 4th place. Jean Alesi now closing in on Stefano Modena. Really, Modena was the one person that took full advantage of that very, very difficult start and elevated himself very quickly from 6th up to 3rd spot. But Gerhard Berger now taking that 3rd spot away. Modena back to 4th. But Jean Alesi looking threatening and pointing towards 4th place, and I'm sure we're going to see a little bit of action here very shortly as Jean Alesi is going to try and position himself close enough to Stefano Modena to try and come down the inside into the tosser, catch him unawares.
Well, Berger streaking away. He does like it here in the wet, and here comes Alesi, as you say.
Well, Alesi's not close enough, but he's having a look down the inside. He's done it. He's an amazing little guy, isn't he? Now he's got to get round the corner. He came in, he's right on the edge of the circuit. He's gone too wide. Such is the price he has paid for that maneuver. He had it right, but just he had too much speed. He just couldn't control the car on the very outside edge of the circuit, and he slithered into the sand trap. I don't know whether he'll be able to get the car out of that, but I suspect it'll be quickly digging itself up to its axles. And amazingly, after one lap, the end of the start of this lap, we now see, look, Jean Alesi just can't keep the car in. Not enough grip. The car is almost sucked into that sand trap.
Well, there is Alesi's abandoned car. Alesi full of bravado, but not quite enough reserve there on that corner.
Well, there you go. That's the effect of having a wet motor race. But Riccardo Patrese hanging on almost tenuously. I mean, there really is virtually no grip here at all. Again, taking these rather unusual lines very wide on the turn into the corner. That's because the outside of the circuit, by and large, has got less rubber down on the slick tire and is therefore a little bit more grip. Ayrton Senna keeping station about 1.5 seconds or so behind Patrese. He's got nothing to worry about. He just wants to stay in as much a clean line as possible. There's still a very long way to go. And of course, as we have seen, anything can happen. The track is so treacherous, you just have to be 6 inches offline, and you could catch a puddle, and that will be enough to take the car off.
Well, there are 61 laps of this race scheduled, and already, as we see, we have lost many of our front runners. Alain Prost before the start of the race, Nigel Mansell after about a lap, then Nelson Piquet, and then Jean Alesi, who we see being winched away here. He was slightly, and there's another one of the LaRousse cars on the sidelines there.
Yes, that's Aguri Suzuki. He's spun. Of course, you see, one of the troubles when you spin the car these days is there's no self-starter on board. And quite often drivers, when they spin, they don't dip the clutch quickly enough, they don't keep the engine revs up, they lose the engine. Subsequently, they're out of the race because you're not allowed to have a push start.
Patrese then the leader from Ayrton Senna on their 4th lap.
And that's one of the 7-up Jordan Fords had a big spin on the straight. I think it's Bertrand Gachot. He'll be in the pits to get a new nose, assuming there's no other damage to the car. Have a look at that again. Well, certainly one of the 2 Jordan Fords. We think it was Gachot. I'll get a glimpse of that probably in a few seconds' time. In the meantime, Riccardo Patrese pussyfooting it all the way around the 3 or so miles of the Imola circuit. Here we are, coming out. Well, that was Suzuki having his spin. That's the second part, the Rovazza corner. Now, that was fairly simple. He ought to have been able to keep the engine running there. I don't know why he didn't.
Well, the Tifosi now saluting Riccardo Patrese because he's virtually all they have got to left to wave for if they don't want to go home early. Both Ferraris out of it.
Yes, one of the two new Brabhams rejoining the track as well. We don't know why it came into the pits, but in the pits it was. But here we are in car with Riccardo Patrese. And now on a flying lap, Patrese probably close to 190 miles an hour just before he comes on the brakes. Ayrton Senna in second place, going by Martin Brundle. He was the Brabham that came into the pits. Ayrton Senna currently 5.3 seconds behind Patrese. Patrese really using that lead to maximum advantage. But as I say, I don't believe at this point in the race that will be significant.
Well, it is quite spread out in the top 6. 5 seconds back to Senna. Berger at 8 seconds. Modena another 7 seconds. Nakajima 12 seconds. Then Martini 4 seconds. Morbidelli just 2 seconds behind. So it is fairly open at the front after 4 laps.
Yes, and we can confirm that spinning George Ford in fact was Bertrand Gachot. His teammate Andrea De Cesaris currently in 8th place, just behind Gianni Morbidelli and Pierluigi Martini. Those two Minardis, of course, are on the Pirelli tires. There we see Gachot's Jordan Ford now in the pits. They've got to replace the nose. Not a particularly quick job because the noses, in fact, are bolted on. They're not just held on by these little Zeus fasteners that used to be the way. There's so much downforce going through the front end of a car today that you have to use nuts and bolts to hold it in place.
Well, Riccardo Patrese, the leader, and Ayrton Senna slipping and sliding all over the place there in second place. Third place man is Gerhard Berger. We have lost Alain Prost, Nigel Mansell, Nelson Piquet, Jean Alesi and Aguri Suzuki for certain. So both Ferraris out of it, and that really is going to be something of an upset. Quite what the Italian press will say about this and what the Italian broadcasters are saying about it now. We'll have to wait until tomorrow to find out. Riccardo Patrese, the leader then from Ayrton Senna in second place. Join us again after this break.
He's the youngest man in the race, and the Judd V8 engine in the Lotus gives ideal power and torque for these conditions. It is not too powerful, and Harkkonen's reflexes are superb. He's going to move up a lot.
Yes, well, new fastest lap of the race now for Berger, and the circuit isn't really drying yet, but if you look there at that picture, you can see that the racing line and various points of the circuit is starting to dry out. There's still much too much water around for anybody to think about changing on to dries yet, but it won't be too long before you see there it's starting to dry on the line. Good picture from the onboard camera in Patrese's car. The sun is still shining brightly, no rain, but we have got a black cloud sort of coming our way, but it doesn't look too threatening right now. And I have to say that I really wouldn't be, and there's Häkkinen, I think, there, looking to make up another place. And I really would not want to be a Ferrari driver right at this very moment.
Welcome back to Imola, where the San Marino Grand Prix is being run in bright sunshine on a soaking wet track. Riccardo Patrese is the leader from Ayrton Senna and seems to be making something of a getaway at the front. Gerhard Berger third, Stefano Modena fourth, Satoru Nakajima is fifth, and Pierluigi Martini is in sixth place.
And further down the field, we've just seen Julian Bailey get past Mark Blundell. Blundell has got Mika Häkkinen behind him, so in fact, Britain's Julian Bailey doing the better job of the two Lotus drivers. Maybe the rain of Britain suits Bailey better than the ice and snow that Häkkinen is more familiar with in Finland.
We were watching Riccardo and there's another one spinning as well. We were watching Patrese just now.
Yeah, that was Mark Blundell, just probably frustration. But look at that, Andrea De Cesaris getting past Roberto Marino. Marino in the new Benetton. Andrea De Cesaris in his 7-Up Jordan Ford.
Watching just now Patrese flying, but Senna has recorded the fastest lap. We saw the gap between Patrese and Senna extend. There's the moment.
track begins to develop any dry line. Well, look at that. On horsepower, Marino was able to pull out and pass De Cesaris yet again. The two cars, the Benetton and the Jordan, they both got the same Ford HB engine, but the Benetton has got the latest version of that, something in the region of 680 or 90 horsepower and race trim over the 650 of the Jordan. Identical engines, but in spec they're different.
So Minardi leading Benetton, leading Jordan in this little group. Morbidelli, De Cesaris and Marino in that little fight.
Yeah, and just at the top of the hill at the Piratella corner, I was beginning to see a dry line appearing. Now that's the highest point of the circuit. This is one of the lowest points to just come through the Acqua Minerale. Here it is still very wet indeed, but the beginnings of a dry line are appearing up at Piratella. So if the sun stays out, it may not take that long. It takes good ambient temperature, a little bit of breeze, and something like 25 or 30 cars running around to try a track out, and that'll happen very quickly as long as the rain does stay away.
Well, we saw it again. Ayrton Senna now quickest again, down to 1:46. And in qualifying trim, he achieved something like 1:43. Gerhard Berger, 1:41. So they're still off their best pace. And even there on the dry, there was just a little tickle at the back end. This is a very tricky situation for the drivers because they're going to have to work out how to trust the track and where to trust it. The team managers must now be looking at the blue sky, which has appeared in a hole over Imola, and wondering whether it will stay with us and they can safely change, or whether the rain will come back.
Well, I think the factor that will determine what happens is really the lap times. A driver is going to be radioing in all the time, first of all, to say where the circuit will. Let me see. Oh, Morbidelli having a nice little pirouette, allowing Marino to take his place. Marino, well, where Morbidelli having dropped back, that was a little bit earlier. The situation is Martini is 6th, Marino now 7th, De Cesaris 8th, late 9th, and Morbidelli dropping back to 10th with that little spin. Here we are back in car with Riccardo Patrese.
And you can see the puddles forming on this track. We did say that this kind of condition might favour the cars with less horsepower. And looking at that leaderboard, I'm pleased to see Eric van der Poel just outside the top 10. That car not really the strongest on the grid and doing very nicely, thank you, in these conditions.
He's doing an extremely good job. But of course, now the track, you can see more signs of a dry lining beginning to appear. And of course, for poor van der Poel, that means that his progress probably will gradually become slower and slower. But this man, Ayrton Senna, has closed back up. He's now just 2.5 seconds behind Riccardo Patrese. Patrese really had a significant advantage. He managed to pull away very quickly in the opening laps. We're now on the 9th lap, and Senna's reduced that almost 6-second lead Patrese had on Senna back down to 2.5 seconds. We don't believe that there's any problem for Patrese with his car. Looking down, you can see that dry line. That's up at the Piratella corner now. We drop down into this tight chicane. Now, this has been a problem part of the circuit on the Saturday morning when we had very wet conditions. You're coming downhill, you're braking downhill, and because that part of the track is so slippery, you really have to brake, not when you think, but before you think you should be braking.
Well, Patrese leads Senna, and Senna is reeling him in. Let's remember that we have lost some major players in this San Marino Grand Prix. Alain Prost before the start. Nigel Mansell is out. Nelson Piquet is out. Jean Alesi is out. And Aguri Suzuki is out. There we see the leaderboard and confirm that Ayrton Senna is indeed reeling in Riccardo Patrese, while the gap back to Gerhard Berger has now increased to 12 seconds. Odd that, because Berger was very quick in the wet, wasn't he?
Well, he ended up being quickest on that session on Saturday afternoon. Of course, it depends very much at the time that you're out of the track in the rain. The one thing about rain is that it is not consistent. Every lap the track is changing. That is the dubious side of racing in the rain or qualifying in the rain. It is not necessarily an indicator to true form. And as we're seeing here now, as the track is showing signs of drying out, this is coming through the Tamburello corner. Ayrton Senna has recorded the fastest lap so far in the race of 1:45.7. That was done when Riccardo Patrese's lap was 1:46.9. So in the last lap, Senna took 1.2 seconds, and the gap now is just down to 1.2.
Ayrton Senna then closing in fast on Riccardo Patrese. Interesting problem about tyres, because it is dry now, quite clearly dry, as you can see there, in a number of places, and still quite clearly wet in a number of others.
Difficult decision. I mean, the circuit in my mind is too wet to take the decision to come in. but I would think in 5 laps' time there's going to be enough parts of the circuit that are sufficiently dry to allow the dry weather slick tire to really work, that the downside is going to be offset by the good side. So I anticipate somewhere around about lap 14, 15, we're going to see people like Patrese, Senna, Berger, all coming into the pits. But right now, Riccardo Patrese beginning to feel the pressure that Ayrton Senna is going to apply to him, and Senna merciless when it comes to applying that pressure.
No matter how pumped up you are, and Riccardo Patrese, as we have said a number of times, really full of himself this season, and especially here in Italy, it must be a very daunting prospect to have Ayrton Senna filling your mirrors.
Yes, it is. But there's a little story about all that. We might come back to it later, but Riccardo Patrese was a little bit unhappy at the end of qualifying yesterday because that man, Ayrton Senna's got the Spec 2 Honda engine. Well, Ayrton Senna's now taken the lead. Is Patrese going to go into the pits? Yes, he is. Patrese is the first one into the pits. Brave decision by Riccardo Patrese. Is this going to be the call of the race? Is this going to be the call that will help Patrese win the San Marino Grand Prix, or is it a little bit premature?
Well, Patrese was the winner here last year. He has been on form in the first 2 rounds. And he pressured Ayrton Senna very heavily in Brazil and was reeling him in at a rate of knots in the final 2 or 3 laps. Quite a long stop as they go to slicks. In fact, an uncomfortably long stop for Riccardo Patrese.
Well, I think Riccardo Patrese has had problems because the speed he came into that pit stop was not normal racing speed. They have still been having gearbox problems with this car, and whatever the problem is sufficiently great to keep Patrese in the pits, and almost looks like he wants to get out of the car.
Ayrton Senna the leader now, and in a lot of clear space because Gerhard Berger is behind him 7 seconds away. Dry line beginning to appear more strongly, and still Riccardo Patrese languishing in the pits. This must be so frustrating for a driver.
Yes, well, particularly having led the race from the beginning, and obviously the problems that Patrese had, which we weren't aware of from our commentary point, were the reasons why Senna was suddenly taking chunks of time out of his lead, but Patrese still in the pits, and whatever that problem is not something that is a mechanical problem that is easily rectified. He really complaining. We're getting word back, in fact, from the pit lane as we're talking, that there's an engine misfire. Now that misfire could be anything from simply a plug lead or something of that nature. It's something much more complicated. Usually it could be in these wet conditions, water has got into the ignition systems on these cars, the computers that control the whole system these days. So whatever the problem is, misfire is the prognosis, and whatever the answer is, well, we have to see whether Patrese can get cured and get back out. But he's now over a lap down on Ayrton Senna.
Ayrton Senna then the leader and beginning to lap the back markers. Join us again at Imola in a couple of seconds after this break.
It's a huge disappointment, and I'm sure it is to you at home. So on behalf of Formula One Racing, I humbly apologise to everybody.
No, well, I don't, actually, and here's why. Look at this man, Gerhard Berger. He's taken 1.5 seconds out of Ayrton Senna's lead, as you see the car being dragged away there. And Ayrton Senna's lead is down to just over 5 seconds now over Gerhard Berger. There are no team orders in the McLaren team. Ayrton Senna, of course, with a commanding World Championship lead over Gerhard Berger of 16 points. Wouldn't have to worry too much if Gerhard Berger caught and passed him, although the Brazilian's pride would be very much affected. But at the present moment, Berger is lapping some 1.5 seconds faster, or did on the previous lap, than his teammate Ayrton Senna, and Berger's got everything to go for. I think he...
Welcome back to Imola, a drying Imola as the sun shines on Ayrton Senna, the leader, from teammate Gerhard Berger by a shrinking margin. Berger reeling in Ayrton Senna. Modena is third, Satoru Nakajima fourth, Pierluigi Martini and Roberto Marino is sixth. We have lost the Ferraris of Alain Prost and Jean Alesi. We have lost Nelson Piquet, Aguri Suzuki and Britain's Nigel Mansell, and there's a strong possibility that we have now lost the man who led this race for the opening 8 or 9 laps, Riccardo Patrese, last seen in the pits complaining of an engine misfire.
I think also he has had a gearbox problem. There were 2 things he was complaining about, but the misfire seems to be the bigger of the 2, and that's the reason why that car is still in the pits. But in the meantime, Ayrton Senna is still leading, but by now just under 4 seconds, just over 4 seconds from Gerhard Berger. And looking from these helicopter shots on the circuit, I would say over half the circuit now is sufficiently dry for any of the leading cars to take a chance and come in and put on slick tyres.
Interesting problem for Ayrton Senna then, because he likes to have a nice long lead. He likes to have the margin to change tyres and get out and be at the front still. The man behind him in second place, though, is his teammate, so he can hardly psychologically battle with him, because Gerhard Berger will know exactly what Ayrton Senna is planning and vice versa.
Yes, but I think these two drivers will drive as a team. There won't be any team orders, though, as such. I mean, Gerhard Berger can pass cleanly and fairly Ayrton Senna and take the lead. Well, then, good luck to him. But look at these two battling away here. JJ Leto, Julian Bayling have a right good old ding-dong. Leto getting wide coming into that final chicane, and Bailey all over the back of the Lara Judd. Of course, Bailey with the V8 Judd, Leto with the V10 Judd. The V10, of course, got more grunt. You could see that Leto slower off the corner, but the extra horsepower told. But Bailey doing a wonderful job. Look at that. Haven't seen Julian Bailey racing in Grand Prix for quite a long time, but he's giving it absolutely everything he's got. And he's going to pass Leto down in the inside into Tossa. He's now got through. Just go through the corner slowly. Eric van der Poel getting past Leto also. Leto's so concerned with Bailey, he forgot about Van der Poel. Berger, the first of the leaders into the pits to come on the slick tyres.
Well, Gerhard Berger makes the decision. Watch the clock, and we'll see how long this pit stop lasts. 6.4 seconds. That was a classic McLaren pit stop.
Great pit stop. May have been a team strategy as well. The team may have decided to bring Senna in, bring Berger in first, to allow him to go back out again and get lapping on the slick tyres to see what the time difference is between wets and dries. That's what a team does, a two-car team will do. Well, Berger, in fact, it seems, may have also had a puncture in the meantime. Back in the pits, one of the two Jordan Fords. Looks like Gasho's car from here. It's difficult just to tell in the little picture. I think it's Bertrand Gasho back in for a second pit stop. But Berger now out on the circuit on slick tyres. Of course, those tyres will have been in their tyre blankets. They will be up to operating temperature. But that part of the circuit there is still very, very wet. So a lot of caution, a lot of attention needed by Gerhard Berger. As Martin Brundle goes through the Peralta corner in his Brabham Yamaha.
So Senna the leader, and Gerhard Berger still second after his pit stop, but 20 seconds behind and running on slick tyres and running some considerable amount slower than Ayrton Senna on that coming out lap. We'll have to wait and see how that settles in and how Gerhard Berger gets on with the bits of the circuit which are still damp. But Berger definitely full of confidence this weekend. He was fast in the bit, and there's Senna going into the pit, so Berger has obviously radioed back and said it works fine. In comes Senna. Let's watch the clock on him. Remember, 6.4 seconds for Gerhard Berger was a good stop. Senna a little bit slower, 7.5. Another fine stop for McLaren.
Yes, very good stop indeed. Both McLaren stopped absolutely first class, but of course, Stefano Modena, Gerhard Berger still in second place. He was in and out of the pits in time, but Stefano Modena in third place. Just about to come across the start finish line. Berger having set the fastest lap. That's an indication that the circuit is now sufficiently dry for the performance of the dry weather slick tyres to be necessary if you want to be in this race.
Senna then, after his pit stop, and Berger's the leader by just under 5 seconds, 4.9 in fact. Still holds the lead from Gerhard Berger, and this could well become the story of this race. Stefano Modena, we're looking at now, is in third place. Satoru Nakajima has gone into the pits, and that, I imagine, is a tyre change.
Nakajima was lying fourth behind teammate Modena, so both Tyrrell Hondas performing already to the level we had hoped to see them perform in the first race of the year. But there you see, first and second, Ayrton Senna, Gerhard Berger. That's the distance on the road. Senna had a pit stop, which is 1 second slower than that of Berger, and that's the reflection as you see it as it stands.
So, Julian Bailey up to 6th place, Eric van der Poel up to 7th. Now, we saw Bailey and van der Poel slugging it around with JJ Leto. As you say, Julian Bailey coming on fire like we haven't seen him in Grand Prix, although he has done it in sports car racing, as you know very well, John. Eric van der Poel, the street fighter from Formula 3000, absolutely coming alive in these conditions. What will happen to those two when the track dries out is another story, though.
Well, we've just had 15 laps of the race so far. Long way to go, Richard, and of course the circuit getting drier all the time, and the performance of the cars with those more powerful engines will gradually tell, but that should not take anything away from Julian Bailey or Eric van der Poel. Here's the conditions to their best advantage. They've stayed on the track, and many more luminaries have fallen off, made mistakes, and I must give credit to both Bailey and van der Poel for a superb performance thus far in the San Marino Grand Prix.
It's perhaps nice, and Berger now on the fastest lap, and you can see 1:36 how much difference this dry line and slick tyres are going to make as the times crawl down.
Yes, Stefano Modena just leaving the pits in his Tyrrell Honda. Modena retaining third spot. He didn't lose a position with that pit stop. But look at this now. This is always a big danger point in a race, coming up amongst the back markers in conditions like this where there is only a dry line. Remember, Senna and Berger are on slick tyres, and they don't want to get off that dry line. They sometimes might have to, but it's not something you feel too comfortable about. But most importantly, you hope that the car that you're lapping sees you. Maurizio Gugelmin now getting the attentions of Ayrton Senna.
So, lap 15 has been completed by the leaders, and they are, as John says, mixing it with the back markers. And perhaps a sad indictment of Leighton House's performance so far this year, that they are among those back markers on this circuit. The All-More still not delivering of its potential, and it does have potential. That's Ayrton Senna, the red and white McLaren, the yellow helmet of Ayrton Senna, the leader of the race. Gugelmin waking up as he goes past the Lotus, and you can see Berger in the background in second place, and that traffic not really helping Gerhard Berger very much.
No, it is a problem, but you've got a bit of a battle going on there. Thierry Boots and Julian Bailey, Mika Häkkinen have all been in. The two Lotuses have been in and out. They're now on slick tyres. Everything is completely mixed up. It's going to take possibly a lap or so for the positions to settle down to get a true reflection of who is where. But one thing is for sure, this is the man leading the race, Ayrton Senna, and that man Gerhard Berger second, just about 2 seconds behind his teammate. Eric Comas in the pits in his Ligier Lamborghini. Well, Nakajima is out of the race. We don't know why. That's the Tyrrell Honda, Satoru Nakajima, who was running in fourth spot. Nakajima now out.
I think we can also safely say that Riccardo Patrese is out, because we have seen hide nor hair of him since he went into the pit with a misfire and perhaps a gearbox problem. And that makes the list of retirements not only long, but a fairly impressive list of Formula One luminaries.
And you know what's so important about all this is that the teams that normally don't get a chance to get into the top 6 have got the best chance they're going to get all year.
Senna the leader from Gerhard Berger in second place. Stefano Modena is third. Roberto Marino is up into fourth, and Ivan Capelli currently fifth, but it's all over the place, as you say.
Well, we've just been able to see Riccardo Patrese rejoin the track, so in spite of that, there he is, just about to be lapped by Ayrton Senna. Now, Patrese's got nothing to lose, and he can just drive at whatever pace he wants. I'm sure the poor man is utterly dejected by having to make a pit stop while leading this race. But back out in the race he is. It's important, if for no other reason than to diagnose and cure whatever those problems were. Whether Patrese will soldier on to the end, one doesn't know. But certainly he lost 4 or 5 laps while the team were able to rectify the problem.
Well, Senna the leader after 17 laps. Berger in second place and just over 4 seconds behind him, so getting mixed up in traffic hasn't cost Berger a great deal. Patrese the man in front of Senna, and Senna goes past him. I think we can safely assume that though that problem may well be better, it doesn't look as if it's cured.
Well, of course, Ayrton Senna is the man leading the race, and Riccardo, being a senior and responsible driver these days, would have seen Senna coming by, so he let him go past, problem or not. If he'd been able to stay ahead and actually pull away from Senna, I'm sure he would have done so, but with the leader so close behind him, there was nothing to be gained, and you know, swings and roundabouts, someday the situation may be reversed, and Senna may remember uncooperation on the racetrack.
So Ayrton Senna, the leader, the man in frame from Riccardo Patrese's car. Berger is in second place. The track is drying out. Join us again at Imola for the San Marino Grand Prix after this break.
And down to the Rivazza comes Ayrton Senna. Now, it's going to be interesting to see whether Riccardo Patrese, and we're looking at Senna now through Patrase's on-car camera, can hold on to the McLaren Honda.
And he's certainly doing that pretty well, and that's great because we should get a nice view of Senna lapping the circuit. Now, the leaders are going pretty quickly now. The circuit's not far off being completely dry on the line because we're only some 4 seconds a lap away from a full dry time with this sort of fuel load on board. So Senna and Berger all on their own with a huge lead, and as yet Stefano Modena in third place has not come through, and there he is, and he's now some 58 seconds behind Gerhard Berger. And
Welcome back to Imola. The sun is shining on the San Marino Grand Prix, and the track is, as you can see, quite clearly drying up. The front runners have all changed from wet tyres to slicks. The rest of the field is in the process of doing that, although perhaps for some of them it was an unwise choice. Well, Ayrton Senna, the leader, from Gerhard Berger.
Yes, that was Eric Bernard we saw pulling off on the side of the track. Ayrton Senna was the leader, just over 3.5 seconds, passing Eric Comas, lapping Eric Comas. Patrese, who is just the car behind Comas, of course, has been in the pits for a very long time. He's not in contention. The team sent him out to earn his keep, and of course, it is important in these situations to try and understand the problem that brought him into the pits in the first place, to cure that, and there's no better way of doing that in a racing environment. But look at that little battle going on between De Cesaris and Capelli in the Leighton House. A yellow flag, something's happened there. There's a car off somewhere, we can't see who it is.
Senna going out of the picture. Coming into this one is the leader from Gerhard Berger in second place. And there is Berger behind Comas. And there's the little scrap you were talking about, and De Cesaris seems to have got the best of that one. Senna stalled behind the back marker. It's not usual for Senna to wait around very long, but this is where he came a cropper several times in making a move that perhaps he could have waited for. Here on this kind of circuit where there is just a narrow dry line, he must be more patient.
Well, he's got all the reason to be patient. He's got more than enough horsepower to deal with the Yamaha engine and Martin Brundle's Brabham. He can pull out and pass him along the straight. Well, he's now done that. And that's basic maturity. I mean, it's fundamental. It doesn't even have to be mature. You don't have to, if you're in Formula One, you should be able to think that simple situation out without having to be a mature Grand Prix driver.
Senna and Berger then first and second. McLaren dominate here, as they have dominated every practice, untimed and warm-up session of the weekend. Berger running much more strongly now than he has of late. He really needed a good result. Brazil and a third place seem to have given him back his confidence. So Senna still the leader from Gerhard Berger, and if you're wondering where the Ferraris are, if you've just joined us, let me tell you that Alain Prost did not make it to the start of this race. It began in appalling rain, and Prost slipped off on the warm-up lap. He was our first retirement. Nigel Mansell followed him on the first lap with a spin, then Nelson Piquet joined him. Jean Alesi out-braved himself on a corner and went off as well. Aguri Suzuki and Satoru Nakajima have both gone off in slides, and now the track is dry and the rate of attrition has slowed down somewhat.
Well, as the track is beginning to dry out, it becomes a lot easier to cope with the conditions, and they really were appalling conditions on those opening laps. The Imola circuit, even dry, is quite a slippery surface. There's not a lot of grip from the tarmac here at Imola, and in the wet it's much, much worse. And in fact, before the race started, Ayrton Senna was heard to say that if conditions in Imola were similar to those as they were in Brazil at the finish of the race in Brazil, he would expect the race to be stopped prematurely because the grip factor here at Imola is that much lower than we saw at the Interlagos circuit. So relief, I think, from everybody that there is this dry line appearing, that the rain appears to be over for this part of the afternoon, and in fact, as we're talking, there's more and more blue sky appearing. The line is getting longer, it's getting wider.
Well, this will, of course, allow the front runners, such of them as are still running, to use their horsepower advantage. And it's a word we've used very often here at Imola because it is a horsepower circuit. The wet conditions have allowed people like Julian Bailey, Eric van der Poel, the cars perhaps with less horsepower than the front few, to show up very well in the early part of the race. Whether or not that remains so, whether or not they drop back as the track dries out, that's still encouragement for the team and the driver.
Yes, it is. It's a great help to Lotus. They've had a very difficult period. They had a very fine performance from Mika Häkkinen in Phoenix. In Brazil, not a lot they could do. Julian Bailey failed to qualify there also through no fault of his own, just the car didn't work. Here at Imola, they got the two cars onto the back row of the grid. And of course, they were both able to take full advantage of those appalling conditions. But in reality, the situation is the team is very under-financed. It doesn't have the engine horsepower they need to put them up at the front, let alone even at the middle of the grid here in Imola. And all one can hope is that performances like Bailey and Häkkinen today might encourage sponsorship to go to the team and enable the team to go out and acquire, let's say, more competitive equipment.
Well, let's just also say that Lotus are, as a team, in mourning this weekend because one of their mechanics had an accident a week ago and has subsequently very sadly died. The whole team wearing black armbands as a mark of respect, and one would hope that an achievement during Imola, even though it may be short-lived, is some compensation.
Well, here we have Senna now coming up to yet another Brazilian driver. Marino moving over, giving Senna plenty of room to get through. Marino, in fact, was very quick this morning in the on-timed warm-up session. It was only at the end of that session we realised that he was in the spare. We knew he was in the spare car, but of course the spare car did not have a nut. Looks like Riccardo Patrese crawling around. Whatever the problems he had earlier in the day have now reached a pitch where that's the end of the day for Patrese. And I'm sure, in fact, he's not that sad having had to sit in the pits for those 5 or so laps while the mechanics sought the problem. To drive in a race, to have to complete race distance, well, either he's being pulled back or he's being pushed back. A disappointment for Patrese, but of course, to have to compete in a Grand Prix so far down with no chance of any success at all isn't the most exciting way to spend a Sunday afternoon.
Well, I added Riccardo Patrese to our list of retirements, then he came out and I crossed him off. He's back on it now and he's in exceptionally good company. Senna still the leader. 23 laps out of 61 have been completed. The lap times now into the 1:29s for Senna and Berger, first and second place, and getting very close to respectable race laps. As the fuel load lightens and the track dries out, that will creep down a bit.
Yes, the other factor that we haven't really talked about so far is what tyre did all the teams fit once they came in for their dry-weather tyres. There was great debate this morning as to which tyre would be the right compound to run. Some people felt they could run the very soft D compound. Others were thinking, well, very marginal. We don't have to make more than one pit stop. But I would imagine that as a result of the race starting in wet, most people have gone on to that soft D compound in the hope that they may make it through without any further pit stops. But of course, after rain, the track surface gets very abrasive. That gives you great grip. It means your tyres wear out very quickly. So we're on the 25th lap at this point. Whether Senna, whether Berger, whether the Pirelli runners can go through on their soft race tyres, well, we're going to have to wait and see a little bit further into this race.
Well, we've been watching Eric van der Poel in the Lamborghini with those distinctive side pods being chased by the Lotus, and still obviously in the action. And Senna still the leader as we come towards half distance. Gerhard Berger some 9.8 seconds behind him in second place. So still looking, as it has done all weekend, like a McLaren benefit outing.
Yeah, the other thing that's rather amazing is that Senna's lapped fourth place man Marino. Such is the pace of these two McLaren Honda drivers that they only have now got third place man, who is Stefano Modena, remaining unlapped.
Well, the two of them circulating in tandem. 10 seconds, not really an enormous gap on a 3-mile circuit, but big enough for Ayrton Senna not to be under pressure. And Gerhard Berger has, for the first time this season, looked as if he might be able to pressure Ayrton Senna in some way.
Well, he may be able to do that. Certainly the The form that Berger has been showing over this weekend indicates that his confidence, his self-belief, his self-esteem even, which really did take a bit of a bashing last year when he joined Ayrton Senna at McLaren Honda, is beginning to be rebuilt. And certainly the team has tried extremely hard to give him that reassurance, to try and make him comfortable in the car. Remember, he's one of the tallest drivers in Grand Prix racing, and of course that height is a big handicap in today's Formula One car.
Ayrton Senna the leader, teammate Gerhard Berger in second place. This is the San Marino Grand Prix. Join us again after the break.
A car which has obviously got a problem. It's a very new car, its first appearance, the Brabham, very little testing, and they've had gearbox and all sorts of other problems. But Senna, as again, undoubtedly the top driver of the day. One has to say that now, because you only have to look at his record. Even in comparison with that of Alain Prost, he's now nearly 12 seconds ahead of Gerhard Berger.
Well, we've just got a report from the pits that Mansell's problem was indeed gearbox. His gearbox had a habit of selecting neutral all of its own accord. He couldn't get second gear at all, and his exit from the race, though, was caused by being hit up the back as one of the Leighton House's spins, and that's Capelli, who was running up in 5th place. So problems for Capelli. He's thrown away a very good placing for him. Hopefully he'll get going again, but you will not know, and the car's sitting its tummies on the curb there, and it's beached. So they've got to manhandle it. And so Mansell, in fact, no doubt, well, he was messing around trying to get gears, was hit up.
Welcome back to Imola for the San Marino Grand Prix. The track virtually dry now. You've just missed Ivan Capelli taking the exit.
Well, we're actually having a look at Capelli. Very pretty indeed, probably 8.5 out of 10 for that. Of course, another one to fail to keep the engine running. The consequence is his car is out of the race and being towed away. Capelli was running in 6th spot. That's elevated everybody else 1 place. Disappointment, another Italian driver for the Italian fans out of the race. That car, as you see, still sitting beside the racetrack. Mechanics, marshals, trying to get the tow rope, which they attach through the rollover hoop, get it attached and push the car out of danger. Eric Comas for another pit stop. That's Comas' second pit stop now.
Ayrton Senna then the leader with Gerhard Berger second and dropping back. He's 13 seconds away. Stefano Modena third, Roberto Marino fourth, JJ Leto up into 5th place, and Andrea De Cesaris in 6th place. Julian Bailey right behind him in 7th, which is excellent for Lotus.
Very good indeed for Lotus, but of course 5th and 6th spots are absolutely vital to those two teams, Delara and Jordan, because they are two pre-qualifiers, and here is a golden opportunity for those two teams to score points and to get themselves out of pre-qualifying at the mid-season break-off points.
Well, there's Capelli's car being hoisted out of it, and we add him to our illustrious retirement list. Alain Prost, Nigel Mansell, Nelson Piquet, Jean Alesi, Riccardo Patrese, Suzuki Nakajima, and now Capelli as well.
Gerhard Berger now 14 seconds behind Senna. Senna really putting in one of those very, very strong mid-race performances. He's capable of upping the game at any point in a race. That's the thing that really, to me, is most amazing about Ayrton Senna. When you think the guy's fully committed, he just goes and blitzes it all over again. And he's got so much capacity. He just uses what he considers to be enough at any point. If he comes under pressure, he seems to be able to extend himself. And even in spite of having, at times, not the best race car, certainly so we saw last year when he didn't have the best race car, still capable of putting in unbelievable performances.
Well, we're just looking at De Cesaris, I think. Oh, that was Gasho.
Yeah, this is Gasho. He's been in the pits a couple of times, being passed by Pierluigi Martini. Gasho right down the field. He was one of the early spinners who had to come in, have his nose replaced. He then had to make a second stop, of course, to have a set of dry tyres fitted, so Gasho lost a great deal of time due to that spin. And that spin was basically on the exit of the long Tamburello corner, and he demolished the nose and paid the price for that, let's say, small mistake.
Well, the Minardis have been running well here this weekend, and I suppose that will give the Italian tifosi something to cheer about, because they are an Italian team with, of course, a Ferrari engine.
Yes, they've got that Ferrari engine, and something they had in qualifying was special, the Ferrari fuel, the Agip fuel, which Ferrari have been using for over a year now. Horrible smelling stuff, but doesn't have to make the old engine perform. And that fuel, of course, isn't available for the race, and to some extent that is a reflection, again, of the performance of the car in the race. So much horsepower is gained by using that qualifying fuel. It artificially elevated the two Minardis of Morbidelli and Pierluigi Martini up the grid much higher than we've seen them this year.
61 laps, the scheduled distance for the San Marino Grand Prix. We have finished 28 of them. We're on lap 29, just over 30 laps left to go. So this effectively is the midpoint of the race. Ayrton Senna, the leader, and the gap back to Gerhard Berger has now increased to 16 seconds. So either Berger is in trouble, and that is perhaps an indicator, or Ayrton Senna has really switched it on. There's about 3 seconds in difference between their lap times, so obviously there is something going on.
I think what's going on is Ayrton Senna is just showing us really what a fantastic driver he is. There doesn't appear to be anything wrong with Berger's car. It doesn't appear to have a misfire. It doesn't appear to be in any mechanical problems. I just think we're seeing another virtuoso performance from Ayrton Senna.
Well, the gap now out to 17 seconds between these two. And we are seeing a lot of the Lamborghini of Eric van der Poel. And of course, it's an Italian car, Italian engine, so you would expect that from an Italian television director. But it is, as John was saying just now, quite rewarding in these circumstances for teams who wouldn't normally be seen. Let's face it, this is the first time that Eric van der Poel has qualified for a Grand Prix. He's tried twice and hasn't made it. This is his first ever Grand Prix race, and he is getting an awful lot of time on the television.
Well, he's done a very good job, and he deserves every second he gets on TV. Van der Poel in line, just behind Martini and just ahead of Boutsen. In fact, I think Boutsen has just overtaken Van der Poel, so that puts Van der Poel back in the 10th spot. But this is what you expect in these kind of conditions. There is no real form. It is a real lottery. That's all you can say, and that's why I find that outside of people like Senna here, who is commanding the race, every other position really is up for grabs.
Well, there's the sign that tells Ayrton Senna he's in the lead, as if he needed a reminding of it. 30 laps he has completed, running in the 1 minute 29 second bracket. He qualified for pole position on 1:21. That's Modena we're looking at there, in between Van der Poel and Bailey.
Of course, Modena still in 3rd place, but some 77 seconds behind Ayrton Senna. Virtually about 10 seconds or so off a lap, and I would think that we'll see in the next 2 or 3 laps the familiar red and white car of Senna lapping the 3rd place. That's, I mean, really, we haven't seen that in a very long time in motor racing. Back in the early 80s, we saw the two McLarens achieve that kind of sheer domination. Of course, he's been aided today with Alan Prost making that little whoopsie. Nigel Mansell doing a similar thing further on in the first lap of the race. Patrese dropping out. So in effect, all serious opposition to the two McLarens evaporated within the less than the first quarter of the race.
Well, Ron Dennis said in Phoenix that there would be 2 developmental McLarens here at Imola, and that he was intending to blitz the season. And unless something goes seriously wrong with the programme in the next few moments, that looks like being the case again.
Yes, part of that blitz, of course, is the new Spec 2 engine that Ayrton Senna's got. Honda brought along an engine which they in fact had planned to run at Monte Carlo in 2 weeks' time, but they had a situation where they thought, well, let's try and run it here. And the way it was worked out was that whoever was the quickest in practice and on official practice would be the recipient of that new engine. Not unnaturally, Ayrton Senna was the man who was quickest. He has got that new Series 2 engine. It's got more horsepower. It's probably got more torque as well. That's another factor why now we see Ayrton Senna pulling away. But in fact, in practice, Williams Renault had a similar situation. Nigel Mansell got the latest version of the Renault engine. When Riccardo Patrese heard how Honda McLaren had gone about making the decision as to where the engine should go, Patrese got all upset. He decided, well, if McLaren do it, why can't Renault do it? I'm quicker than Mansell in qualifying. Why shouldn't I have the engine for the race? A little bit of a nosebleed from Riccardo, but maybe because of the race being in Italy, it's his local racetrack. he decided to have a little bit of a bleat to the press. But at the end of the day, both of the Williams did start the race with identical engines. But expect to see more improvements from Renault as well as Honda.
Well, we're looking at Ayrton Senna absolutely tearing past Van der Poel and the Lotus as if they were in a different league. And we are really talking about the Super League that you were describing earlier on, John. Ayrton Senna then leads from Gerhard Berger in second place, and he is about to lap third place Stefano Modena. Join us again in San Marino as the Grand Prix continues.
Front and coming up behind him fast, the battle between Van der Poel, as we look now at Andrea De Cesaris, sixth position, being lapped for the second time by Senna, and Andrea De Cesaris moves over, locks up his tyres in his eagerness to get out of the McLaren's way. So you can see the car that's got one of the most effective liveries, colour liveries in the race, the Jordan 4, just disappearing over the crest of the hill. Here it is, Andrea De Cesaris, sixth place.
Yes, and the battle of the race at the moment is the Van der Poel and Hakkinen battle, and Hakkinen's got a lot of problems there to deal with Van der Poel because the Lotus is clearly hasn't got the power from the Judd engine that the Lamborghini's got, and so on straight line speed Hakkinen's got a problem, so he's climbing all over Van der Poel around the corners, but he's having a lot of trouble trying to get past, and even if he does get past, he's got to do it in such a way that he has a few corners before he gets onto the long straight, otherwise Van der Poel will come straight back past him when they...
Welcome back to Imola. The San Marino Grand Prix coming up to an hour and 33 laps old. That means we are beyond the halfway distance. We're heading towards lap 61 and perhaps slightly more than 90 minutes we expected since the early part of this race was held in torrential rain. Ayrton Senna, the leader, and dealing with the traffic in his usual style, and you can see him getting very annoyed there.
Well, he should be annoyed because Stefano Modena didn't seem to have any idea at all that he's about to be lapped. And look at that, Modena did not even see Ayrton Senna. Now, Senna had been in his mirrors all the way past the pits, through the Tamburello, down to the Tossa, and still Modena has not allowed the race to go through. Now, Modena is running in third place. He's run all year, but he ought to have enough conscience to look in his mirrors. There are flags around the circuit, and that to me is something that, in spite of the enthusiasm that Modena might have for his driving, is poor driving by him.
Well, you did give it away there. Ayrton Senna, the race leader, is about to lap Stefano Modena, who is in third place, and that does rather underline the enormous domination which McLaren Honda have achieved here in Imola. Gerhard Berger is second, 16 seconds behind Ayrton Senna, and Senna seems to have dropped back a bit from Modena. Give him a chance to have a look in his mirrors and get used to the idea that Senna is there.
Well, Senna's just pacing himself. He's going to make a move. Coming up the chicane we see here, he will close up and then get on the power, pick up the slipstream from the Tyrrell Honda, and hopefully as they come out of the Tamburello corner, get past cleanly. At least Modena can look at his mirrors. He's not trying to overtake another slower car.
Ayrton Senna then with the development Mark II version of the new V12 Honda engine, chasing the V10 which powered him to his world title and McLaren to their constructors title last year. And Modena and Tyrrell really doing quite a good job to be in third place, as you say.
They've done a tremendous job. And Modena, I mean, it basically is doing a very good job running in third place. But of course he doesn't seem to have woken up to the fact that he's got, and there's a blue flag being waved at him. That ought to give him a chance to look at his mirrors. He's not gaining anything by running in front of Senna like this. It's not going to enhance his career as a Grand Prix driver. He's doing a good enough job in third place. But when the leader is catching you and is almost about to lap you, you've no reason not to let him go through.
Well, the gap between Senna and Berger, as you can see, 15 seconds, give or take a 10, and that's really not likely to make much difference to Ayrton Senna. But more blue flags waving. This is Senna's moment, and again.
Well, that wasn't a particularly clever place to try and pass anyway, because Senna wasn't sufficiently close to Modena to do so, but he was just putting himself into the mirror of Modena's Tyrrell. He was saying, goodness sake, look in your mirrors, I'm here, I'm the leader of the race, I'm lapping you, let me get past, I'm not going to do anything to you, I'm not racing you for position or anything.
Well, Senna right up underneath the rear wing on the straight and getting that toe now.
Yeah, I would imagine that once we get through Tamburello, we'll see Senna come out of the slipstream of Modina's car, pass coming into the tosser. A dirty look from Senna. I'm sure he's not very well. Modena finally clocked that Ayrton Senna was there. He actually did back off early and let Senna get past. Amazing that he could do those 3 or 4 laps without realising that the leader of the race was right on his tail.
Well, as we've said, it's an unaccustomed high position for Stefano Modena. I'm sure he must be on something of a high and he must be concentrating on staying in 3rd place.
Yeah, but I think after the race, Ayrton Senna might have a quiet word in his ear and say, listen, Stefano, when I come up behind you, I'm not going to pass you in position. I'm only lapping you, so get out of my way.
Well, Ayrton Senna the leader after 35 laps. Berger is 2nd. Modena very definitely now in 3rd place, having been lapped, as has everybody else. Marino is 4th. Mato is up to 5th, and Cesaris still in 6th place. We've lost Prost, we've lost Mansell, Piquet, Alesi, and Patrese, also a Suzuki, Nakajima and Ivan Capelli, so it's slightly thinned field now. And some of the less well-known faces and teams of Formula One appearing at the front end of what is currently our leaderboard beyond the halfway point. And nice to see it indeed, and nice to see these two have been spotted for some while, haven't they?
Yes, well, Bertrand Gachot ought to be much further ahead of Julian Bailey than he is. He certainly should be ahead of Mika Hakkinen because he has got a much superior motor car. But of course, Gachot had to come into the pits, locking up left front brake. Maybe that spin he had very early in the race, the setup of the car, the balance of the car may not be very ideal. Gachot ordinarily would be much further ahead of the 2 Lotuses than he is. He would not be the meat in their sandwich. Andrea De Cesaris running in 6th spot. Of course, for all those people who have to go through pre-qualifying, for Ligier with Poulsen, who's in 7th spot, Vanderpool, a pre-qualifier on 8th spot. Now again, Gachot locking up that left front. There must be something wrong with the car. That's not normal. It's twice we've seen that happen. So I suspect in the little spin that we saw Gachot have early in the race, there's been some minor suspension damage, because that is not a normal thing to see one wheel lock up or other 3 remain unlocked.
Well, that's Pierluigi Martini in the Minardi in the front of that little pair, and being followed by Modena in 3rd place. I beg your pardon, it is. And Minardi have done very well. I think the Ferrari engine that they have used didn't do them much good in Phoenix, it didn't do them much good in Brazil. They suddenly started to appear very high up the qualifying sheets this weekend, whether it was the burst of enthusiasm for being here on home territory, or whether it was just that qualifying fuel that's lifted them, but they're still doing it in the race as well.
Well, I have to say, most of it came from the fuel. Racing in Italy can also be a great pressure as well as a motivation. I think the performance of the 2 Minardis today is about where I would have expected them to be under normal circumstances. But of course, such as the potency of some of these brews that are available for qualifying, it can make up as much as 40 horsepower difference. And if your company, if your team is not providing you with a qualifying fuel, or as potent a qualifying fuel as, let's say, Jeep have available for Ferrari and for the Ferrari engine Minardi, you will suffer. So competitive are we now on Formula One grids that you're talking in tenths rather than half seconds or seconds as we were before this very, very competitive 3.5 litre formula really came on song.
Ayrton Senna has completed 37 laps and is now 18 seconds in front of Gerhard Berger. And then there is a massive gap back to Stefano Modena in 3rd place. These 2 McLarens are dominating this race in a way which must be appalling everybody else who is still running. As you say, though, we have no Williams and no Ferraris in there to fill up that gap, which is what we really expect to see.
And in fact, as we look out of our commentary booth, we can see lots and lots of the fans are deserting the Imola racetrack. The car they came to see, the 2 Ferraris, of course, out very quickly indeed. Alan Prost was a spinner on that corner there, that downhill right-hand corner, on the final parade lap. The race hadn't even started, and Jean Alesi was out within 2 laps. He had a brave overtaking manoeuvre coming into Tossa Hairpin, but just couldn't slow the car down enough, and eventually slipped off the edge of the track into the gravel trap, and that was his race over.
Well, Senna the leader, Berger in 2nd place, the Ferrari's out of it. And as you so rightly say, the Tifosi now deserting this racetrack in their droves.
The only advantage of all this, of course, it makes everybody's life here a lot easier when we leave this evening to go to the airport. But really a great shame indeed, because Ferrari are such a vital part of Grand Prix racing, and to lose those two cars within the first 2 laps of the race, well, I mean, apart from any disappointment to the fans that come to Imola, to us it's always a disappointment. For Alan Prost, for John Lacey, 2 serious race contenders, to be out of the race, well, great disappointment.
Ayrton Senna benefiting from blue flags which are waving as he carves his way through the field. He's lapping some people for the second time, and on his way to what looks like another precision McLaren victory. He has some 23 laps to complete out of the 61, and there you were saying that Gasho was in trouble, and there in the pits we see the evidence.
Yes, whatever the problem was emanated from his spin, and that's the 3rd pit stop, we believe, for Bertrand Gasho. He had a stop for the original replacement nose, then he had a pit stop for tyres, and then he's back in the pits again. But look at this, Gugelmin and Comas having a right old ding-dong. They're running right down the field, but there's on our monitor 0.3 of a second. Well, in fact, now Gugelmin has just overtaken Comas, but at the end of the day, those two will not feature in the top 6, but nonetheless having a good battle.
And Modena just coming in to join it on his way through, the 3rd place man. Roberto Moreno, who we've seen absolutely nothing of, is still circulating quietly in 4th place. And Andrea De Cesaris, I think, bringing up still 6th place.
Yes, we've got JJ later running in 5th. JJ again, another of the pre-qualifiers, so the Dallara Judd team will be absolutely biting their nails in the hope that their man can retain 5th spot. He's got something like 20 seconds lead over De Cesaris in 6th spot, and later was a further 20 seconds himself behind Marino, who is in 4th spot. So those positions look fairly set. It's really just down to reliability.
Well, now of course, as the race settles into its sort of 3/4 distance, that is the time again when you imagine every team manager standing quietly in a corner with his fingers and arms and everything else all crossed up, hoping that it will just carry on.
Well, we've just completed the 40th lap. Just over 20 left in the race. Julian Bailey getting past Mika Häkkinen, and really a nice little wave from Bailey.
So the 2 Lotuses looking very good. But it's Ayrton Senna who leads, Berger 2nd and Stefano Modena in 3rd place. Join us for the final quarter of the San Marino Grand Prix after this break.
Excellent drive by Julian Bailey up into 10th place. You see, he's got something to prove. He is personally sponsored. He hasn't had much to show for his sponsorship this year because of car problems rather than Bailey problems. And that is Andrea De Cesaris into the pits. He was in 6th position, and it looks to me from the leisurely way he's sitting there and the lack of frenetic activity around the car as though his race is almost over. They're working on the back of the car. It may be gearbox, it may be something, a loose diffuser, something like that, but whatever it is, it means that now Pierluigi Martini has moved up into 6th position as Roberto Moreno laps Van der Poel in 8th position. On this, the 41st lap out of 61, Ayrton Senna leads his teammate Gerhard Berger, both of them in the McLaren Honda V12s, by 16 seconds, and Senna is lapping consistently the fastest of all, even though he has this very substantial lead. Stefano Modena is in 3rd position, and in 4th place Roberto Moreno. 5th is later.
There are just 20 laps of the San Marino left to run. Ayrton Senna is the leader from Gerhard Berger, with Stefano Modena still in 3rd place. Roberto Moreno is 4th. JJ Leto is 5th, and in 6th place now, no longer Andrea De Cesaris, but Pierluigi Martini, because De Cesaris is in the pits, and I think it was him that we saw before the break and not Gasho.
No, in fact it is De Cesaris in the pits, but Gasho had also been in. De Cesaris literally came in just before we went to the break, and we haven't seen him go back out again, so great shame for Eddie Jordan. His car still, you could just see out of the corner of the screen, Mechanics still working around the car. Well, the situation is that Martini now up into 6th spot, Boots in 7th, Van der Poel 8th, Bailey 9th and Hakkinen 10th.
Well, that is a most unusual looking leaderboard, but then we have a most unusual looking set of retirements. If you have just joined us, you will be surprised by this. If you haven't, you will already know that Alain Prost went out before the start of the race. Alesi went out a couple of laps later. Mansell and Piquet both spun off in the rain. Suzuki and Nakajima also did the same. Tracy has gone out with an engine misfire. Ivan Capelli has spun off. Andrea De Cesaris is looking like a retirement with every passing second.
Yes, well, that's the fortunes and the fate of Grand Prix racing. And we see Mika Hakkinen, Julian Bailey, starting past Eric Van der Poel. Bailey's progress really has been very, very impressive indeed. Bailey's first drive this year in the Grand Prix, tried twice, Phoenix in Brazil, and because of the electronic gremlins the car had, he didn't make it. Certainly making up for it now with Mark Gondel's going slowly there. That's the result of a spin, or he's got a problem. Thierry Boutsen in now for the second time for another set of tyres. Probably again the consequence of running on a softer D compound on an abrasive track.
Well, Ayrton Senna still out there in the lead. This is Gerhard Berger, second place man.
And that's Stefano Modena, his car coming to a stop. That's Modena, who was only in the 3rd spot, and that's about to evaporate for him.
I think we can safely add Stefano Modena to the list of retirements, and that changes everything. The Imola circuit is proving rather a hard one.
It is a hard circuit, but this is very unusual because we expect after the start of a race such as we had with rain that everything isn't going to get abused in the early part of a race. But we've had such a high rate of retirements. Well, Modena gesturing that he wants to be pushed off the track. He knows his day's work is finished. In the meantime, this man, Ayrton Senna, just continues just unbelievably in the lead of yet another Grand Prix. And no one there to challenge him at all. 14.5 seconds ahead of teammate Berger. The situation now really set for McLaren 1-2, but of course we've still got just under the 20 laps left to run, and anything can happen. But one must imagine the way McLaren put cars together, it is not luck that they win motor races, it's because they do a better job than anybody else.
Well, the list of retirements has aided someone very quiet. Roberto Marino has just slipped his way up into 3rd place. He's nearly 2 minutes behind the leaders, but as other people have dropped out, this man, Roberto Marino, is now 3rd in the new Benetton B191, which was, well, I think the word dog was mentioned several times during qualifying, probably in the Benetton pits, because it just did not come on as strong as it could have done. They said that they had fixed most of their problems on Saturday, and it didn't look too bad in the morning warm-up, although they lost an engine.
Yes, Marino did have on the first lap, an engine blew up, so he jumped into the spare car. Now that spare car, in fact, had some revised gearbox parts fitted. They arrived down on Saturday afternoon, they were fitted, and the benefit of that was that the gear change was a lot more precise than the gear change in his original race car or that in Piquet's car. Now Piquet hasn't or didn't feature very well in the race. Marino may well still be in that spare car, and he's got on with the program. He's now running in 3rd spot, and if he can stay there at the end of the day, I think Benetton will go away thinking, well, we got a result after all.
Well, it certainly looked very unpromising at the start of this Grand Prix, and let's face it, any new car has teething problems. Some have worse teething problems than others and have gone away without qualifying. So this John Barnard design actually coming good on its first outing, which I think is something of a surprise.
Well, fundamentally, John Barnard makes very good motor cars, because this one didn't just literally leap out of the box, put itself on pole position and shatter the opposition. Everyone began to wonder, well, what was the problem? And I think that the basic car is extremely good indeed. Certainly the drivers are very complimentary about the amount of downforce it has, about the car's straight line speed. But just those little niggles with the gearbox prevented the car from displaying its full potential. Of course, it also didn't get a great deal of testing here during the week's testing before the week of the Grand Prix. And then Saturday being a wet day, that further restricted any development of the car.
Well, of course, with something like 40 laps to its credit, it hasn't been fully used, but it is now holding 3rd place for Roberto Marino. Leto is fourth, Martini fifth, and Van der Poel is in sixth place as De Cesaris sits in the pits. At least we think he's still in the pits. And with 17 laps to go, if Eric Van der Poel can hang on to that sixth place, there will be some singing and dancing in the Lamborghini pits this evening.
Well, it's so important. You cannot emphasize just how important it is to a team to get points when you're in a pre-qualifying situation. First of all, it gets you out of pre-qualifying, but also it opens up access to all the benefits of being a FOCA member, being a constructor. So Van der Poel can keep the momentum up. He's just been lapped by JJ Leto, who is in fourth spot this time. He's another pre-qualifier, so those two teams really relishing the situation in which they find themselves. Ordinarily, one would have not expected them to be in the top six, but that was all due to the rain.
Well, Senna on lap 46, 13 seconds ahead of Gerhard Berger. Marino in third place, 2 minutes behind. Leto, Martini, Van der Poel. Then the two Lotuses, Hupkinen and Bailey, and that's encouraging for them. Thierry Boutsen, Mark Blundell, Maurizio Gugelmin and Eric Comas. Very, very different without the Williams and the Ferrari to pad that gap at the front end. It's a very lonely Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger who are leading this race.
Well, for them it's now purely a formality. All they have to do is reel off those laps. I mean, for Ayrton Senna, we anticipated a hat-trick. We thought that Riccardo Patrese was the potential spoiler for Ayrton Senna of that hat-trick. Patrase's luck deserted him with a misfire and a gearbox problem. But there we see McLaren's yet again 1-2, and there's nothing to... You talk to Ron Dennis, sometimes you get a rather cold response to what appears to be a fairly reasonable question, and as far as he's concerned, his philosophy in motor racing is that there is no such thing as luck. Luck is something that is down to you. It is down to how the team is run. It is down to the motivation within that team. It is not luck. It is just sheer good management, hard work, and of course having people like Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger driving for you is no unsure thing either.
Well, an awful lot of people put their faith in their future sometimes in Ayrton Senna and rely on his ability to produce results for them, and he seems to be able to do that with relentless efficiency. Ayrton Senna, we've watched his car control on this circuit in different circumstances over the course of this weekend. He has dragged that round once by the scruff of his neck in appalling conditions, and on other occasions seems to float it about an inch to go wherever he wants it to go.
I think that's one of those performances today. Remember, he didn't get the start, he didn't get the lead of the start. Patrese got that lead, but after the final Senna started to eat into Patrase's lead. Patrese, of course, did have the beginnings of a few problems, but there we have the man, Ayrton Senna, comfortably in the lead, 15 seconds over teammate Gerhard Berger. Neither driver under pressure. Third place man Roberto Marino already a lap down on these two, and I would think the signals from the pits are, well, just remain as you are.
Well, we have 47 laps completed. The leader is on lap 48. There are 61 laps on the programme, so we are coming towards the end of this race. And I should think there must be an awful lot of people now on the track and in the pits who have their fingers crossed and are just hoping that nothing changes between now and that checkered flag, because some people are going to get a better result than they dared to hope for when they arrived here in the beginning of this week.
Well, here we're looking at one of those people, Julian Bailey and teammate Mika Hakkinen. Lotus, I'm sure, never dreamt they would be on the verge of picking up points there. Hakkinen and Bailey are running 7th and 8th. They just need one of those top 6 cars to stop before the end of the race, and that will give us the chance of getting 1 point. And really, when you consider the difficulties the team was in throughout the winter, and the fact that they're running on a shoestring budget, it would be really, I think, a very fair reward for that team if they could be in a position to pick up 1 point. Of course, that means somebody's going to drop out of the top 6.
Well, the top 6 at the moment looking fairly static. Ayrton Senna is the leader, from Gerhard Berger in 2nd place. Marino is 3rd. We'll see the end of the race in a moment. Join us again after this break.
Are out. Both the Brabhams are still running. Neither of the footwork Porsche cars started, because Michele Alboreto, who had hurt himself here at Imola, just wasn't able to qualify any more than his teammate Alex Caffey was. Both the Lotus cars are still running, and only one of the Leighton House cars is still running in the race, that of Mauricio Gugelmin, who is in 11th place. Nelson Piquet has long since disappeared for Benetton, although Marino is still holding that 3rd position. Only one of the Dellaras started, that of JJ Leto, who is in 4th position and looking as though he's going to score his first World Championship points. JJ Leto, who started racing for the Onyx team last year. Martini is still running for Minardi, but Morbidelli has disappeared a long time ago. Both the Ligiers still running, as I said. Both the Ferraris out right at the beginning of the race, crossed before it even started. Both, sadly, the Lola Fords of Gerard Larousse's team out. And
welcome back to Imola for the closing stages of the San Marino Grand Prix, the 11th San Marino Grand Prix, the 3rd round of the 1991 Formula One World Championship, which has been dominated so far this year by Ayrton Senna. First in Phoenix, first again in Brazil, and currently first in San Marino by about 14 seconds over teammate Gerhard Berger, and then by a lap by 2 minutes over Roberto Moreno in the new Benetton Ford. This is domination, and you can spell that with as many capital letters as you like.
Yes, Ayrton Senna now just into the final stages of the race. Gerhard Berger, his teammate, that's the distance they are apart. Just over 15 seconds. 3rd place man Roberto Moreno. Now we're looking down on Moreno's pits, and we think that there is the possibility Moreno might be coming in for a tyre stop. He's got over 20 seconds of the lead on 4th place man JJ Leto. Well, that's not really enough to come in here, even in a very fast pit lane like we have in Imola, to come in, slow down, change wheels, go back out again and not lose position. Another man we just saw there, we got a picture, was Thierry Boutsen. He is now up into 7th spot. He's gotten past the 2 Lotuses, Mika Hakkinen back into 8th spot, Julian Bailey on his gearbox in 9th, and these two really, well, not racing for anything other than, I think, the pride of the team and individual. Look at Bailey trying to come out of the slipstream of Hakkinen. Well, Hakkinen did concede. I think that he was being quite gentlemanly about that. Bailey was in a position where he was hoping he would get cooperation. He did get it. Mika Hakkinen now dropping back into 9th. But of course, the man that's passed both of them just in the space of a little over that was Thierry Boutsen with the Lamborghini-powered Ligier, giving it its best performance this year.
This does seem to be a race of worst and best, because I think Ferrari have probably had their worst outing for as long as any of them want to remember. Alain Prost has definitely had the worst day of his career, I should think. And on the other extreme, Lotus and Lamborghini in the shape of Eric van der Poel have been having their very best day. And so too, perhaps, were Tyrrell until disaster struck.
Yes, and in fact, I'm wondering, are people like Alain Prost and a few others beginning to wonder the wisdom of having the championship scoring system change to include all your events this year, not just your best 11 as we've seen over the last number of years. Had it been the old system, well, by not scoring here today, not even starting the race here today, would have given Alain Prost the chance to fight on another day. But now every race counts, and of course Ayrton Senna's on course for 10 points. Alain Prost has had no chance whatsoever, and really Alain Prost must begin to wonder what has he got to do to try and make up that deficiency. Although we're only into the 3rd event of the year, if Senna wins, he's going to have something like 21 points advantage over Alain Prost.
Well, this is the battle for 6th place that you're looking at. Eric van der Poel has got the Lambo into 6th place at the moment. If he can hold it there for another 15 laps or so, he picks up that vital point which will lift him from pre-qualifying. Behind him, though, is Thierry Boutsen, who, as you were saying, John, is on a bit of a charge at the moment.
Yes, but the engine in Thierry Boutsen's car, a Lamborghini engine, as Eric van der Poel, appears to me to be breathing very heavily. You can see on the overrun as he comes up to a corner, you see the puff of smoke coming out of the back. That indicates, well, there could be a problem that may not allow Boutsen either to get past van der Poel, but more to the point, make it to the finish of this race.
Well, van der Poel holding him up, and that smoke now becoming quite marked. Instead of just a little puff, it's a permanent dribble. So perhaps Boutsen knows that he's got a problem and is making the most of his moment.
Yes, well, that's usually an indication that an engine's about to pitch. That means blow up. But Boutsen certainly pressing on very hard indeed. Van der Poel with the Lamborghini engine and the Lamborghini car. The two cars really probably not great difference in performance. The difference lies in Boutsen, who is undoubtedly the more experienced of the two Belgian drivers.
Well, Marino still circulating there. We thought that perhaps he was due for a pit stop.
But he's now got JJ Later right on his tail. That lead that he had has evaporated away, and JJ Later now closing back up onto the tail of Roberto Marino.
Well, as we were saying, this car, brand new, out of the box, hasn't had the world's greatest test program because time has not allowed it to do so. As John was saying just now, John Barnard has designed most of the Formula One grid, and his cars usually are something special, even if they may not be special on day one. They've had some problems in qualifying, and there were some very long faces and some very tight lips round at Benetton over the course of this weekend. Marino's third place looked as though it was going to be a bonus for them and would lift that balloon, but JJ Later is pressing.
Yes, and Marino's engine is beginning to sound very rough, so I think JJ Later could easily be imposed for his first podium, and that would be a fantastic performance and result for him. Also for the Lara Judd team, currently in fourth spot, that's 3 points. Third spot would give him 4 points, and now he's just taken third spot. Roberto Marino obviously having a big problem, and ordinarily Marino would not allow that third place to disappear, and I think Marino's in fact his race virtually is over. He looks like he's about to slow right down. If he can make it around, we may even see him make it into the pits, but whatever Marino's problems are, it's pretty big, and the only advantage he has that 5th and 6th spots are some way behind him, but we've still got something like 9 laps of this race left.
Well, Lato is past. We were talking about the Van der Poel and pre-qualifying, and we should say it about JJ Lato because that's another of the teams that goes through that awful roulette that is played for an hour on Friday mornings.
It's a truly appalling experience for any team. It really destroys the team for the rest of that Friday session. There's so much mental and physical exhaustion at the end of that 1 hour on Friday morning that really a team is not fully effective again until the Saturday. But that's the name of the game. If you want to be a Grand Prix team, you've got to go through the middle, pre-qualifying, and that does sort out the men from the boys.
Well, speaking of sorting out the men from the boys, this one's definitely a man, isn't it? Ayrton Senna at the front, 53 laps under his belt, just on his 54th lap, which means there are 7 left for him to complete. He is the leader by 12.5 seconds from Gerhard Berger. JJ Lato, as we've heard, has moved up into third place, but is 2.5 minutes behind. Marino has dropped back to fourth. Martini is fifth, and Eric Van der Poel was sixth last time we saw him, although he had Thierry Boutsen breathing down his neck, and as John was saying, also breathing fairly heavily from the back end.
Well, Boutsen appears to be dropping away from Van der Poel. We saw him very close to Van der Poel. Now the gap appears to have widened again, and I suspect that oil smoke vapor we saw coming out of the rear of his Ligier Lamborghini was the telltale sign that Thierry Boutsen has got a problem with the car. It appears to have stopped now. That probably means there's not very much oil left in that engine.
Well, moves over and that Senna past, as Van der Poel I'm sure will do, because he saw Senna coming last time around and stepped out of the way very smartly indeed. Very much the new boy in Formula One and very much aware of it.
Well, it's very good to see a young driver, a new driver in Formula One, remembering that the mirrors that are on his car are there for a purpose. We saw a poor example of that from Stefano Modena, who went for almost 2 laps, keeping race leader Ayrton Senna behind him. Now, a driver of his experience ought to know better than that, but Van der Poel, the young guy, in a relatively uncompetitive car, in a very new team, doing an extremely good job.
Well, we've been happy to see Julian Bailey and Mika Hakkinen just fringing on the points there. A bit disappointing that after a good start we seem to have lost track of the Jordans of Gachot and De Cesaris, and a disappointing weekend perhaps again for Jordan.
Yes, it was a very disappointing weekend, and especially on a day like today, because these races, a wet race and then turning dry, they are a lottery. And when you get a gift horse like Alan Prost falling off, Patrese going out, Alesi going out, Mansell going out, all very early, you've got to be in a position, you've got to take advantage of those situations. Now, obviously a team doesn't intend to have a mechanical unreliability problem, but there you go, you've got to be as see here JJ Leto and his Dallara Judd, they've been able to take full advantage. He's now in third spot, and if he can maintain that until the end, that will guarantee, I can assure you now, that will guarantee Dallara coming out of pre-qualifying at the switchover in the middle of the season.
Well, Ayrton Senna is the leader. Gerhard Berger is catching him at 2 seconds a lap. Join us again after the break for the end of the San Marino Grand Prix.
0.531, that must be threatening the lap record, and that is a new lap record. So, he's being allowed to have a bit of fun. Let's see if in the remaining laps, we've got a few more of them, whether Senna will be allowed to have a go at it.
Well, let's stir up a bit of controversy by hypothesising that Senna... You remember what happened in Phoenix, when, unbeknown to us, Ayrton Senna had gearbox trouble, and Riccardo Patrese was reeling him in and only just failed to win because in Brazil, because he too had gearbox trouble. I'm talking about the second race of the year. I wonder, we'll watch this gap very carefully indeed. It was 9 seconds on lap 55, 9.7 to be exact. And if it's a lot less than that, the next time they go through, it may be that Ayrton Senna has got a problem. Well, here is Gerhard Berger going through anyway. 9.7 seconds was the gap. And just to prove me totally wrong, it's now 11.2 seconds because Senna has gone round 1.5 seconds faster than his teammate. No problem for Ayrton then. Lap 57, out of...
Welcome back to Imola. The leaders of the San Marino Grand Prix, Ayrton Senna in front, are on lap 57 out of 61. This race is nearly over. Senna's lead over Gerhard Berger is shrinking rapidly, or it was shrinking rapidly, but Senna appears to have responded somewhat.
Yes, it came down to under 10 seconds. Now it's back up to over 11 seconds. Ayrton just yet again realised that, well, maybe I'd like to have more than those few seconds in hand over Gerhard Berger. And reflecting back, of course, to the Brazil Grand Prix, when we weren't quite sure what the problem was with Ayrton Senna, it was, of course, the gearbox, compounded by severe cramp, as well as by having the seatbelts. So there's a problem. There's a blow-up. Roberto Moreno's race finally is run, so that's going to elevate Julian Bailey into 6th spot. Pierluigi Martini is in 5th and 4th. Van der Poel 5th, Bailey 6th, and really and truly, I mean, if anybody ever had a quid on this for the final results, they'd made a fortune.
Well, certainly I think most people who were betting this weekend had their money on Ayrton Senna and McLaren Honda, and who can blame him for that? Well, Van der Poel now creeping up into 5th place, and as JJ Leto is helping Dallara get out of pre-qualifying, so Van der Poel's finished, if he can hold on, picks up 2 points and will help the Lamborghini team out of that pre-qualifying drama.
Another team also that's going to benefit is the Minardi Ferrari team here, Pierluigi Martini. They were one of the teams that were falling into pre-qualifying. Again, with Martini now in 4th spot, 3 points are going to help their effort. So really, this race has been absolutely crucial to so many people. Those that are having to pre-qualify, and those that were on the bubble that might fall into the pre-qualifying trap.
It's been crucial to Ferrari as well, but crucial in the way that they had hoped it would not be, in that both their cars went out very early on. You can't really blame Cesare Fiorio for that, but there are an awful lot of people in Italy who would like to shoot the manager and may well take this as an opportunity.
Well, I think in this case they'll be shooting the wrong horse, because in spite of what may or may not happen within the management at Ferrari, it was not Fiorio's fault that Alan Prost went off in that river. It was Alan Prost's fault. And in the case of Jean Alesi, well, I have to say, it made a brave overtaking maneuver. It didn't come off. You have to admire him for it, but at the same time, maybe prudence would have saved Ferrari's day.
Well, Jean Alesi very keen to make his mark at Ferrari, and there you see the Ferrari team packing up early. Not a sight which will please the Tifosi, some of whom, in fact a great number of whom, have already packed up early themselves. The grandstand still perhaps is full, but the hill at the Rabazza, which is normally crowded with them, the flags are packed up, and we can see them walking out of the circuit.
Yes, indeed, obviously great disappointment, and a very unusual Grand Prix, one that will stand out in the memory of those people at Dallara, at Lamborghini and Lotus, but certainly for teams like Ferrari, Williams, and for the Jordan team, disaster.
Well, as you saw from the caption there, the confirmation that both Bertrand Gachot and Andrea De Cesaris have joined that list of retirement, so disaster indeed.
We're on the 59th lap now. Ayrton Senna really now beginning to feel that this race is going to be his hat-trick of 1991. And what a fantastic job that this team have done for Senna. Senna doing an equally fantastic job for the team, must be said. And that is the quality that this team has. It employs the best drivers, but essentially it gives those drivers the equipment not just to finish races, but to win races. Now there's Maurizio Gugelmin. His Ilmor engine looks like it's had a serious hemorrhage. He's pulled off at the top of the circuit, up at the Piratella. A late retirement in the race, Maurizio Gugelmin climbing out.
Well, it is a long list of retirements, and because of it, it has changed the look of this leaderboard. Ayrton Senna is going to be very happy to pick up his third straight 10 points in a row, gives him 30 points. He'll be even happier that none of his major rivals for the title this year are going to pick up any points at all, and practically no one behind Senna and Berger, who are collecting points on what looks like the finishing order at the moment, is likely to trouble Ayrton Senna in the title race during the season, if we're being realistic.
Oh dear me, that was one of those moments that could have been disaster. Eric Thomas not quite sure whether Senna wanted to go through or not. He couldn't decide whether to go through. Senna decided, well, I'm going to go through anyway. But look, Gerhard Berger suddenly right in the frame. Just, well, it was 5 seconds on our monitor, but that's about 3 seconds on the road as they come up to the end of the 60th lap. Ayrton Senna obviously backing off. He did a lap moment at 32.2. Last lap, some 5 seconds a lap slower than teammate Berger. Whether they want to make this a grandstand finish, I'm not quite sure. Whether a bit of, let's say, call it showboating coming into the McLaren team at this stage in the race. I've got no doubts that Senna is going to be the winner. Gerhard Berger, 2.7 seconds crossing the line behind his teammate.
Well, it would indeed be nice for McLaren Honda if these two could come across the line almost into vision together, if the pair of these red and white cars cross this line, not side by side, because that won't do anybody any favours. But with Senna just in front and Berger just behind, that would be the result and the photograph that McLaren Honda want to see from Imola. Ayrton Senna, though, is quite definitely on his way to his third successive victory of 1991. Gerhard Berger in second place and just 3 seconds behind him has got the lift which he really needed to have for his career. Gerhard Berger has been in something of the doldrums, but he is now on a roll. Second place for Marlboro. McLaren, remember, will help them dominate that Constructors' Championship as well, as if they didn't dominate it already, which they do. But this is the man to whom all the plaudits must go, because Ayrton Senna has ruled Imola since the moment he arrived here. He has been the quickest thing, apart from his teammate Gerhard Berger, throughout this weekend. Pole position for the 55th time, and now coming up to take the checkered flag for the third time in 1991, Ayrton Senna.
Well, that's a great performance from Ayrton Senna, a great performance from Gerhard Berger, and absolutely stupendous from Honda, from McLaren, from Goodyear. We said after Phoenix, in my mind, the 1991 championship really was over. Well, that's Eric van der Poel. That is unbelievable. He has just come through the Ravatsa corner. It appears he is out of fuel. He may well still be fortunate enough. He may well retain that 6th spot.
That is absolutely tragic.
Yes, indeed it is. Well, that's fate. That, unfortunately, in motor racing, you don't take your position until you cross the finish line.
Well, Senna the winner, and they did indeed achieve that perfect photo finish of the two McLaren Hondas. Senna first, Berger second, and that may well put Julian Bailey back up into the points, because Hakkinen had passed Bailey, and that may well put both Lotuses into the points.
Yes, it does. It looks like the Lotuses have picked up 5th and 6th places. What awful luck for Eric van der Poel and the Lamborghini team. What a gift for Lotus. Remember, they had a tragedy here. One of their mechanics unfortunately died as a result of an accident here last weekend. This is no compensation for that, but at least they can leave Imola
with 3 points, and that really is absolutely superb.
Well, this San Marino Grand Prix saved its excitement from the beginning to the very end, because we had an upset right at the very end, and there is the classification that says Senna, Berger, JJ Leto third, and they will be pleased about that. Pierluigi Martini fourth, that team will be pleased. Mika Hakkinen in fifth place, and Julian Bailey in sixth place, which means that Lotus do indeed pick up 3 points from San Marino. No bad thing for them. No bad thing at all for Ayrton Senna and for McLaren Honda. The Grand Prix is over, but join us again after this short break.
Who similarly had no points in 1990, and a super race for Lotus. Mika Hakkinen, fifth in only his third Grand Prix, and Julian Bailey sixth, so both the Lotuses finish in the points. A great race for them. Thierry Boutsen seventh, and Mark Blundell in the Brabham Yamaha finishes eighth.
Yes, well, a good day for some of the drivers we don't normally see up in the points. They've had good, reliable races. They don't have competitive cars, but today, the real story of today was the loss of both Ferrari and the Williams team right at the beginning of the race. Prost even went out on the warm-up lap, spun off in a puddle and couldn't get going again. And Alesi also threw his race away in the Ferrari after a couple of laps with a little bit of over-aggressive and inexperienced driving, which no doubt Ferrari will not let him forget for a while. But that really ruined the race, and I was saying just before the race that the wet conditions normally ups mechanical reliability rather than downed it, but of course that doesn't allow for the brains inside these semi-automatic gearboxes, which in Williams' team, I think, or certainly in Mansell's case, was his problem. In fact, Patrese had a little bit of an electrical problem on his engine to start off with, then a gearbox problem later. So, unfortunately, mechanical reliability took the Williams team out, driver error took the Ferraris out, and that sadly left McLaren's absolutely on their own, really, to dominate this race. But it did give a lot of the people we don't see so much of a chance to show their abilities, and the men of the race from the back of the grid certainly were the two young lions at the Lotus team, of which Mika Hakkinen finally emerged on top after a race-long battle with his teammate Julian Bailey, and they both drove marvellous races to finish 5th and 6th, and that will be just great news for the Lotus team, because they need every little bit of good news they can get at the moment.
Yes, indeed they do, and it proves that all the others, Ferrari, Williams, Benetton with a new car, but Williams in particular must be very discouraged, because their car is right with the McLaren in terms of performance while it's running. But this Achilles heel in the form of the semi-automatic gearbox, which makes its own mind up apparently when it's going to change gear, has got to be overcome. It's the Monaco Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time, and that of course is a very different circuit to Imola. Imola fast, open, wide and swinging, and Monaco uphill, downdale, hairpin bends, braking, accelerating. You need a nimble car. And
Ayrton Senna has claimed his third successive victory in typical Senna style.
Yes, indeed, and as I was saying a little bit earlier, after Phoenix, I said, well, to me, the 1991 championship was all but over, and in fact, when we came to Brazil, then I wondered whether I'd made the right sort of anticipation, but in fact, now we see Ayrton Senna having achieved that hat trick, and he's now got 30 points in the championship, and really, with the McLaren steamroller really getting into action, the championship is going to be very, very hard indeed to be snatched away from Senna, from McLaren. Absolutely fantastic performance from the team, from the drivers, from Honda, from Goodyear, from everybody. And to get their two drivers first and second like this, well, and on a day that was extremely difficult indeed, well, an amazing result.
So Senna leads with those 30 points, and really the title looks as if it belongs in a Brazilian pocket almost already. That of course helps McLaren Honda in their chase for the Constructors' title, although it's looking less like a chase and more like a runaway. McLaren Honda have 40 points, Ferrari languish on 10, and there cannot be an Italian heart that is not saddened by that. Williams Renault have 6, they picked up nothing here this weekend, and it has really been a disaster for the number 2 and number 3 teams in Formula 1.
Really, I mean, to say the weather was the reason why, that's no excuse. Alain Prost is a very, very experienced driver. He ought to have been more cautious. He is by nature extremely cautious anyway. To get caught out just shows that he is human like everybody else. In the case of Jean Alesi, well, that was impetuosity, that was youth, that was Jean Alesi. And really, one would assume that had he not gone off, he may well have been on the way, certainly to a podium position. I don't think that the Ferrari today, in spite of being at Imola, was a good enough car or a fast enough car to beat the 2 McLarens in a straight race. As for the Williams, well, Mansell, we don't know why he spun, we just saw him stopping. And Riccardo Patrese was beset by gearbox problem, an electrical misfire. He was the man that really could have upset the McLaren apple cart, but again, he had to retire before half distance, and well, that's the result. The 2 McLarens utterly dominant, and why should it change?
Well, Alesi, the man who could have fired up the Tifosi here, came a cropper on a corner. He outbraved himself. He did say to me before the season started in his best Clouseau voice, I have how you say the earth blood, and he proved it. But this is the man who has the mind of a computer. This, as you said, John, the other day, the closest thing to an astronaut in Formula 1. Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger, first and second on the podium. And I dare say your little heart is gladdened to see JJ up there as well.
A great performance. JJ Leto is a young driver who has shown a great deal of promise, particularly in Formula 3. In Formula 3000, he didn't convince people quite as much as he did in Formula 3. He got into Formula 1 with the Onyx team. He then moved on to Dallara, and really, that's a fantastic result for JJ. He did a superb job. He kept the car on the island when others fell off. The Dallara team, and also, let's not forget John Judd. His little organisation has produced an engine, a V10 engine, good enough to put JJ Leto on the podium alongside Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger with the might of that V10, V12 Honda engine behind them.
Well, of course, Judd have had quite a weekend of it, haven't they? If you look at the top 6, it hasn't been a bad outing for them at all.
Not at all. Getting 5th and 6th places with Hakkinen and Bailey. Well, there's not much wrong with the V8, but certainly the V10 as an engine is a substantial improvement. And what a great fillip for people like Dallara, who took a big, big chance going with a relatively small and certainly under-financed engine builder. Well, that trust has been rewarded with a wonderful 3rd place.
So Ayrton Senna waving the trophies awarded for his victory here. He is not the only person to have won something, though. Remember that we have been running a competition. We asked you, what was Ayrton Senna's Christian name? What nationality was he? Brazilian? Here are the winners who scored well on that. So Ayrton Senna, I think this is a familiar sight for him. Not such a familiar sight perhaps for Gerhard Berger, and definitely unfamiliar for JJ Leto. He gets a trophy to wave as well. This must be a very happy little trio on the podium. Ayrton Senna winner, Gerhard Berger second, JJ Leto is third. That's the San Marino Grand Prix. The next Grand Prix is Monaco. Before that, we take a look behind the scenes at San Marino. Inside track on Thursday the 2nd, 8 o'clock in the UK, 9 o'clock in Europe. The Monaco Grand Prix live here on Eurosport on Sunday, May the 12th. And Ayrton Senna spraying the champagne all over the place. Gerhard Berger, Ayrton Senna, just total domination. From John Watson and myself in San Marino, we leave you with these pictures of the weekend.
Pay attention, everybody.